Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. Civil discourse has long been part of American tradition, dating back to our founding. But in recent years, the talk of politics on Thanksgiving has become taboo. But just in case the conversation does take a turn, the White House wants to make sure you're covered. NTD's Iris Tao brings us the story.
Ahead of the upcoming holiday weekend, the White House has rolled out a list of Thanksgiving talking points. Top officials at the White House, including a chief of staff and press secretary, shared this document on Wednesday, titled President Biden's Top Accomplishments for When Chatting with Your Uncle at Thanksgiving. And the first thing on that list, tackling inflation and lowering costs. It cites a recent decline in gas prices and what it calls moderating inflation levels. It goes on to praise Biden for passing infrastructure and gun control legislation. And it devotes a section to attacking Republicans, accusing them of raising costs on Americans. The list goes on, but critics say it leaves out key facts. Although the price of gas did come down in recent months to now about $3.60 per gallon, that's still about 50% higher than when Biden first took office. Compared with last year, fuel oil prices are up about 60% and utility gas service up about 30%, both increasingly concerning as winter hits. Meanwhile, the Republican National Committee responds to the list and accuses Biden of lying about inflation. It cites a new report that says a traditional Thanksgiving meal is costing about 20% more this year, making it the most expensive Thanksgiving on record. And Congressman Jim Jordan sharing his list describing this year's Thanksgiving. It reads, fill up your car with expensive gas, hope you don't get robbed doing it, and pay 20% more for Thanksgiving groceries. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Border Patrol agents have relied on Title 42 to quickly expel roughly 1 million illegal entries this year. Now this policy is on track to come to an end 1 month from now. What are the expected implications of this, and are there policies that could effectively replace it? NTD's Melina Wisecup has the details.
Illegal immigration usually slows during the holiday season, but this year it's expected that Border Patrol will encounter a much different scenario, with Title 42 set to end less than a month from now on December 21st.
There are already thousands of people camped out in Mexico waiting for the end of Title 42, according to lots of reports. So we're going to see more of an influx of illegal migrants and more enrichment of the criminal cartels that are profiting off of our policies.
The Title 42 rule was created under Trump to quickly expel migrants during the CCP virus pandemic. The Biden administration predicts that the removal of Title 42 will result in thousands of additional people making their way across the border. And we know right now the Biden administration is working on policies, they say, to fill the void of Title 42 once it does come to an end. In your opinion, what kind of policies do you think would be effectively able to fill that void?
First of all, by being more adhering to the law on who qualifies for asylum and using the tools of keeping illegal migrants in custody near the border to determine if they have any hope of qualifying for asylum or any other benefit, and when they don't, quickly removing them. I mean, we've had these waves of mass migration in the past, and in the past the government has cracked down on them quickly, but instead what the Biden administration has started to do is to literally create pathways where they almost escort people into the country and immediately give them work authorization so that they then have kind of a faux legal status in the country. They have gone beyond what authority Congress actually gave them to allow people to enter on parole. And it's compromising our state and local government's ability to attend to the needs of Americans and legal immigrants who've settled in these places.
It's called significant public benefit parole. It's meant to be used only on a case-by-case basis for humanitarian reasons, such as for specific medical care or to care for an ill family member. But the Biden administration is now using its parole authority to cover almost everybody who's crossing the border illegally. 15 Republican-led states have asked the court to reconsider ending Title 42. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Election concerns continue to unfold in Arizona. Republicans have filed several lawsuits challenging how Maricopa County conducted its voting. Joining us to discuss the developments, we have Jacqueline Timmer, founder and director of the election security group American Voters Alliance. Jacqueline Timmer, thank you so much for joining us in the Capitol Report.
Thank you for having me.
Jacqueline, votes are still being counted in Arizona 2 weeks out. There was a lot of chaos and confusion in this particular election. We know Kari Lake has yet to concede, but other Republicans, maybe not as high profile as her. If you could get us up to speed what they're doing, and where do you think things stands right now in terms of some of these key races?
Right. Well, you know, Arizona is an interesting race. It mirrors a lot of what we saw in 2020. And with that, we're seeing the same irregularities, the same nonprofit involvement, the same patterns of issues that are more or less new to the election system. So with a lot of the races going on right now, there's contention. As you said, Kari Lake has not conceded the race. I know that the Attorney General candidate for the Republican Party has filed a lawsuit and is joined by the RNC in that lawsuit as far as, you know, what's taking place here, because there were so many irregularities in the count that it likely could have affected the vote.
You know, we hear so many different things. We get fragments. You did, in passing there, just mention nonprofit involvement. I'd like you to elaborate on that. But, you know, a lot of people don't even want to have this discussion. But how widespread was this situation where we saw tabulators down? And should this be enough to draw widespread attention and scrutiny?
Well, I think that's a great question, and the question of widespread is always an issue, but I think the other aspect, or the flip side to that, is the location of the issue, because right now there's a huge conversation around disparate impact of voters and voter suppression. We're seeing it along racial lines, we're seeing it along political lines, and so when you have a particular regional area where machines are down, or you're having a particular issue with, say, military ballots, for example, as we saw sometimes in 2020, you have questions along those partisan lines of where those issues are occurring. And so any type of election issue, especially in the functional administration of that, is a major problem that should be looked into, especially if it falls along geographical lines that also fall along partisan lines. Now, with the nonprofit involvement, that speaks to our larger investigation of what we've seen as a pattern actually going back to the time of Bush v. Gore. In 2000, you start to see a shift in the election administration process where it's no longer transparent and inclusive to the American people, but it actually starts to move behind closed doors, where you have nonprofits and third-party vendors that become an immediate and intimate part of the election process in a way that pushes America out of the counting room. And we're seeing this pattern from the time of 2000, very prevalent in 2020 with the Zuckerberg nonprofit involvement, which of course was only a drop in the bucket. Our investigations have found over $1.6 billion in monies and services that went into the election administration aspect in 2020 alone. And we're seeing a lot of those same patterns in 2022. These same nonprofits are involved. We're seeing public-private partnerships. There are issues with the voter rolls. In Pennsylvania in 2020, over 80 leftist nonprofits had direct front-end access to the voter rolls that allowed them to put people into the voter rolls. And we're seeing that same access, those same partnerships continuing nationwide as we move forward.
Now, my producers are telling me in my ear right now, just now, that the race for Attorney General, you have the candidate there, Republican, I believe, Abe Hamadeh, down by just 850 votes. Seems like an awful lot of nail-biters as of late. That being said, is this race headed for a recount?
Well, I think that actually the question is a recount the right response? Because if you are recounting votes, and there's the potential for fraudulent votes, and there's a potential for non-fraudulent votes, a recount isn't going to determine that. Really what we need is a system overhaul. We need legislative reform in our election laws. They're antiquated regardless of which side of the aisle you stand on. But I think it is very likely that it will go to a recount. It falls within that margin of error. And again, the lawsuit acknowledges that that case, or that particular race falls within that margin of error.
I think a lot of folks who thought and believed that the 2020 election was fraught with election fraud or irregularities held out hope that the courts would intervene, which of course never happened. Do you think that what we're seeing here in Arizona will be any different?
I honestly don't know. I do think we have to take a step back and look at the question of fraud versus lawlessness, because what we're seeing in Arizona, there are counties that are withholding certification because of the issues in Maricopa. We have this broad pattern that we're now seeing in the U.S. where there is an issue in the urban centers where the count takes weeks and weeks, and then there's a slight margin in that victory, and that's going to create questions. And it would, if there are issues, it disenfranchises voters statewide and nationwide, etc. And so with that, you know, the courts may not be taking on these cases, but we need to look at what we're bringing forth in our arguments. Are we advocating and asserting that fraud absolutely took place, or are we looking at the fact that the way that the election was conducted in Arizona disenfranchised a certain population and did not disenfranchise another population in a way that would be contrary to election law, in a way that could potentially violate HAVA? So we need to look at the merits of lawfulness in the question of certification, as opposed to simply asserting that there is a fraudulent election. And the answer to that is advocating for transparency in the election process and intimately getting involved as citizens and activists.
Jacqueline Timmer, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Representative Carolyn Maloney of New York is under review by the House Committee on Ethics for soliciting tickets to the Met Gala. The office found substantial evidence she improperly requested an invitation multiple times. The gala's tickets run at a cost of $30,000 each, and the Ethics Committee says Maloney pulled strings to ensure an invitation in at least 2016 and 2020. The report says Maloney called the former president of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. In that call, she allegedly requested a ticket. This is after she was passed over for an invitation by organizers. The report says such a call is improper solicitation for a House member. Members of Congress, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Mitt Romney, have been guests at the high-profile event in past years, but their invitations appear to have been unsolicited. Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.